now joined by Abhishek Kaushik, I hope I got the pronunciation right. And this is a talk that should have been at 9 p.m. However, due to some technical difficulties, it's been moved to now. And we're talking about building and shipping Flask side projects fast. So, Abhishek, do you want to just tell us a bit about yourself and who you are, what you work on, etc., before we get started?
Hi, Gabriel. I hope I'm audible.
You are, yes.
Yeah, great. So I'm Abhishek Kaushik, and I am a backend developer at a healthcare startup. So I have been building side projects since about last 2-3 years now, and mostly my tech stack has been Flask in the backend, and for front end, the basic you have the usual HTML, CSS, and all the JavaScript frameworks. So I built my first side project on Flask, which was creatorlist.tech, which is a platform for students to showcase the side projects. And the topic of today's session is basically building and shipping side projects fast. So one of the main important things of side projects is you have to ship it fast. You cannot build it like a good product or something which requires months and months of effort. So that really helped me, and that's why I shipped it with Flask. And after that, I went on to build multiple projects using Flask. And there were projects which I shipped in 4 hours with Flask, and there were some projects which I shipped in 1 week. One of the latest one I built was ficate.xyz, which is a certificate generation tool for event managers, basically to send certificates to all their participants. And I keep building side projects, and I think Flask is there's something which helps me build the backend from scratch and ship it extremely fast. You can take care of the authentication and stuff like that. So basically, there's not a lot of headache. You can just get into building and shipping stuff. So yeah, that's in short about me, and I'm still building and hustling on multiple ideas I have.
Okay, so one of the things that sort of piqued my interest there, how do you get a plan of what you want to write it, test it, and release it? I think you said in a week sometimes. How do you work that quickly?
Yeah, so one of the reasons, I mean, for side projects is that it cannot be a very, what do you say? It cannot cover all the edge cases. It cannot cover all the failing cases. Basically, you need to build something. The idea is to build something which works and which basically is built very fast. So the usual flow of my projects is I think of an idea, I see, so this is the business side. I think of whether it's viable, I take feedback and stuff like that. And then I sit with myself with pen and paper and I work on the backend. So basically the entire user journey, how the data flows, what happens in the backend, where do I have to store it? And so I try to ship it very fast, I try to cut down corners. So say for example, if there's data which needs to be stored in a database, so setting up a database with MySQL may take up some time, not very much, but some time. So I would instead store it in a Google Sheet. So that is even faster. So basically I cut down corners as much as possible. And once the entire roadmap is done, I start building. And so the building takes some time. Definitely you have bugs and stuff like that. So once I'm done building, there comes the point of testing. So I do the basic testing. I don't use any kind of tools or stuff like that. I just do a user journey and the backend testing, all the API endpoint testing, stuff like that. And once the basic version is working, I release it to my close friends and family so that to see whether there's some problem in the production environment, and then I go on the another iteration of fixing those bugs, and then it's released to the public.
Okay, so I think the way you're cutting corners, surely that would make it inviable for future deployments, though, or do you go back and like you mentioned, instead of using a database, you're using a Google Sheet. Would you go back and change? Would you go back and change that in future to use a database, or would you just leave that on a Google Sheet?
So it depends. I mean, if you come to a point where the Google Sheets is not a scalable solution, I think your business or your project has been extremely successful. So if you manage to, unfortunately, a lot of side projects don't manage to reach that scale. So Google Sheets has a limit of 5 million rows, I believe. So if I were to reach, with my projects, I have not reached that stage. because it handles most of the queries. There's only a delay factor which matters, but I mean that's fine for a side project. So there's one this famous project, if you've heard of levels.fyy, which is basically gives you the salary ranges of all developers across the world, and that has a backend database of Google Sheets, and the original owners, they moved it to a database just a week back, I believe. So I mean, if you can, I think scaling won't be much of a trouble because the main factor is getting users to the project.
Okay. And if you've got so many projects, how do you know, or so many ideas, how do you know which one is the one you want to focus on and which one is going to be the most successful or not, as the case may be?
Yeah. So although I try out a lot of projects, but I at least give 6 months to one project at max. So what I usually do is I have multiple ideas in my head. I think about them and then I talk to people. So basically, I only build ideas which uh, where people are almost ready to use. So they are like, if you go out and reach out to the prospective users, they are like, give it to me right now. I need it right now. Not like I may use it. Let's see how it looks like. So if the idea is like that, then probably you want to try on some other idea. So that's my general approach to building things.
Okay.
So, Kaushik, Abhishek, coming back to the Flask building fast, the framework itself, is there a set of plugins that you have handy that you usually go out with?
So mostly, so Flask is so simple. I mean, you do not really have to even have plugins, I believe. I mean, it's really simple. You just have to write a few lines of code and you have this one endpoint running. But to build new projects, what I do is I have some boilerplate code. So basically, I was discussing this with Abdul. So I had trouble with authentication because almost every project needs user authentication, social authentication.
Right.
So I had trouble with Flask dance. Basically, it was pretty confusing. So what I had done is I built boilerplate code over that, and I used that for all my subsequent projects. And rest of the things, I think authentication is the thing which is common to almost all projects. Apart from that, I don't think. I mean, there's not much. I use something called the rate limiter thing, which is to make sure that API endpoints are not abused. But yeah, that's about it.
How about while deploying it, do you use Unicorn or something else?
So yeah, so that's another cool part. So the first project I built, creatorlist, was deployed on AWS EC2 instance using Unicorn Nginx, and that was quite a hassle. I mean, it took some time because I was a beginner then. But right now there's another. I do not use. I use basically serverless. I use data.sh, if you have heard of it. So it basically takes care of all your DevOps. You just have to push your code and it takes care of the deployment. Something like Glitch or Replit, something similar to it. So it auto scales and it takes care of most of your needs. So I think when you're building things fast, DevOps is a major headache, and data takes care of it. And I mean, Flask takes care of the development.
All right. And what do you usually go with for the database part for quick building of a project?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I mostly use MongoDB so I have you have Atlas, MongoDB Atlas, which gives you clusters to store your data. I use that if it's a project which requires some heavy operations. Otherwise, I go with Google Sheets, or I go with database, which is basically another usage of data.sh. So yeah.
I see. So most of the applications is coming from the serverless data.sh itself.
Yeah. I mean, that's the point of building things fast, I think. I mean, if you spend a lot of time in that, it takes up a lot of headache. I mean, you have to define schema, you have to do a lot of things, which is good. Of course, it is definitely required, but for faster building, I think you can ignore. And then when you see the idea has traction, you can worry about those.
Is that another reason for you to choose Flask over some other web frameworks, for example?
So yeah, definitely. So I like Python. I have a preference for Python because of the wild, lot of range of libraries it supports. Apart from that, the language is simple, but I chose Flask because it was the first thing I was introduced to when I started with backend development. After that, I tried a lot of things, Node.js and things like that. But Flask is uh, extremely easy. I mean, the lines of code is very, very less. You can, it's, I mean, it's just very obvious and simple to me. I've tried Django, but if you want to build simple things, it has got a lot of boilerplate code which can clutter up a lot of things and probably even confuse you. So that is one of the reasons I have stuck to Flask.
Do you also use any architecture tools like to structure your Flask application, for example, Flask Blueprint or something like that?
No, I came across Blueprint while I was working with Flask Dance, but with basic projects, you really don't need blueprints, I believe. I mean, you can get down. So once you start to scale, I think you'll have to worry about those. So I do not really come across those.
What was
All
that
right.
.sh thing that you mentioned? Data.sh? I didn't catch that. What was that?
Yeah. It's data.sh, data. Yeah,
Oh, okay. DETA. Okay, okay.
yeah.
Kept searching for DATA.sh and
And they have
Yeah,
something
even
called database, which is also DETA. So
oh, okay. Some new things that I'm learning today.
yeah, I mean, just do. You can give it a shot. I mean, it's free. You can host unlimited stuff. It's free, totally free.
interesting.
So
So
how would
is
this
is
compare with something like Heroku or Python Anywhere or something?
Mhm. Heroku is, I've tried Heroku, but
Hmm.
I feel the UI UX is a bit complex for me. I mean, it's not very complex, but when you have to deploy, you come across. So if you have to, I mean, there are errors which the Heroku has its own limitations, and also it has its, I guess they call it droplets. No, that was for DigitalOcean.
What,
So
what is that?
Heroku
I'm
has
sorry?
it. They have these coins. They have certain free tier basically.
Okay.
You cannot host multiple whatever instances, and debugging in Heroku is a big pain. I feel you have to go to their dashboard and then do stuff like that. You have to deploy multiple times, and but if you see data, you everything is can be handled from the terminal itself. You can deploy just with a single click. You can update environmental variables, and if something goes down, you can even see the logs. It's pretty straightforward. They have cut down half of the things. And another reason is if you want to build things fast, you don't want to keep on having multiple instances and pay for each of those. So data takes care of that too. You can host unlimited stuff. And yeah, so to worry about less about deployment, I think this is the reason. Heroku, I feel it's good, but it has its own set of troubles.
Right. I don't want to move away from the Flask angle too much,
Yeah.
but I'm going to linger just one last thing. What is the flip side here? Like, what is the catch in data? Like, I mean, there is no free lunch, right? So,
Yeah. The catch is they have, I guess, the RAM limit is about, the memory limit is about 250 or 500 MB, I guess. I'm not sure. And they are pretty new. I guess they have been in the business for 1 year or 1.5 years. So they have a lot of errors which are not documented. So you have to directly reach out to their tech team to solve those, although they're pretty fast. Apart from that, to be honest, I've not found out much of uh, any trouble. That's why I use that.
fair enough. Yeah, the part about a lot of errors being undocumented slash unfound so far is a very valid thing, and that's something that's a trade-off that is fine in the scenario where so much of it is free. So nice, thank
Yeah,
you.
exactly.
Interesting. And is there any particular pathway that you would recommend for somebody getting started with, say, a side project in Flask that they should follow?
I
Maybe a
mean,
particular boilerplate or a structure, or how should they get going?
so so if you're building a side project, which is if you're building something, so if you're building any type of project, so what is the first approach is you end up trying to complicate a lot of things with Flask. So I mean, cut down a lot of corners as much as possible. So I have my boilerplate, which I can share the link of, which is to handle the authentication part, which is common with almost every project you have. So you can use that boilerplate, or you can play around with your the way you like. And basically, once you build one project with Flask, you'll start to see patterns with your subsequent projects, which are common elements. And once you see the common elements, you need to pick those out and make a boilerplate for yourself, or you could use some which are already hosted on GitHub. So I think that's the way, and I believe the Flask is fantastic because you don't have to worry about a lot of things. And yeah, that's about it. Just play around, and the community is awesome. So yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, I mean, absolutely feel free to share your share your boilerplate code, and I think this can also help in not just side projects but also in hackathon projects, right? Where people need to quickly build up an application and get going.
Absolutely.
So
I'll surely share. Yeah.
Apart from authentication, so some do you also have to deal with say admin interfaces or something?
Or
the UI side of it, the templating side of it as well.
Yeah, so I actually forgot to mention this. So I get to use I use Jinja for some of the so for admin dashboards. It's just 1 or 2 pages. So because only I have to say it, so I make it not so beautiful. I keep it ugly, but I handle it mostly with Jinja templates, and I don't make it REST API. So I think in that way it helps me. It becomes easier. You don't have to make API calls and then handle all of that. Yeah, that would be about.
Awesome. And for all right, so Jinja is one thing that you recommended. Do you also have to handle, like, I'm just trying to understand other sort of important plugins or important aspects that people need to take care of, people need to get going for their application to be on, like, to make it live, right? So for example, taking care of say data validation or managing the session or adding to a queue or rate limiting, like you mentioned. There's something called Flask limiter as well, which does that. So all of these, would you recommend one or more of these for most of your projects that you have used so far?
Yeah, so I use Flask session for maintaining data. So I mean, there are 2 ways of authentication. You could use JWTs or cookie based. I use mostly Flask session because it's easy and it's pretty straightforward. You could use JWT, but I'm good with that. So there's another challenge which I'm currently worried about, which I'm trying to solve for myself. That is queuing system. So I have multiple API requests to make. Basically, I have to send a lot of emails. So that is something I'm trying to figure out in the backend myself. Yeah. So, but you know, that's the thing. I mean, when you're building simple projects, you do not have to worry about these. So yeah, I guess I would not be the right person to comment on that.
I see. I mean, anybody else also here can, feel free to jump in. I have mostly used Celery itself, like for managing queue mostly, and then connect it with RabbitMQ or Redis,
Right.
something else, Kafka or something. So mostly RabbitMQ actually, but yeah.
Right.
But yeah, like you said, probably for a simple application, that these things might not make a lot of. You might not everybody would need that. For debugging, you mentioned that obviously Heroku is a little bit challenging to do that, which makes Datadog a little more likable. What do you use for debugging on your Flask application itself, like from the code side?
I mean, it's totally raw. I use my terminal, so I do not use any tools as of now. I mean, my lines. So the projects I have, they are hardly, I guess, 1,000 lines of code, single page. So most of the Yeah, so most of the things are handled with terminals. So I do not use, and I use Postman for testing the APIs basically. But yeah, that's about it.
Okay, sure. That sounds good. I think Flask has a Postman. This also, right? Um, Plugin for Postman as well, which I think generates something, a Postman collection from the Flask application directly.
Oh wow, I've never heard about it. I'm going to try it now. That's great.
Let me just share it on the session chat on Discord.
Sure, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I found this like I think not so much ago. Actually, very recently, some months ago actually, and like this seemed like pretty cool tool.
There is also the Flask debug toolbar, which is the cousin of the Django debug toolbar that you can install. So it gives you the
Nice.
same sort of information where you can find out what APIs have been sent out, what errors have come up because of missing APIs or flawed routes and all. So also the amount of time each API takes, all of that is also viewable in this debug toolbar.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
this is
This is
so
a
great.
this
Yeah.
this this is the sort of thing that I was asking actually, and this can help a lot of people who are just getting started, who have no idea, where the things are failing and all that.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
a lot of these things are, I think, um, learnable, as in like things that are missing in Flask can be learned from Django and ported. Like WorksView, that is like very compatible with Flask, is now possible even in Django, right? It
Yeah,
wasn't supported before, but now it is. So we don't have to be independent of each other, is what I'm trying to say. You can learn from each other and have the best of both worlds.
of course. I mean, it's a Python ecosystem anyway, so
Yeah,
um,
that's what.
a lot of these tools can be used in multiple applications as well. Like it's not very exclusive at the same time.
True.
Also, I have learned a lot of optimizations by just integrating it to Datadog or something, and then looking at like the performance metrics and all that. I'm not sure how much it has helped other folks as well. All right.
No, I
Yeah.
would, in terms of architecture, I have two schools of thought. One is whether you want to make the architecture bulky and in that process gain a lot of analytical leverage, or the other school of thought is make it light enough so that you have the bare bones sort of an application where you optimize for an easy architecture, but you sacrifice some amount of analytics and monitoring and all of that. Just have basic diagnostics set up. So I found both of them to be equally useful. Like you mentioned, integrating with Datadog and all that is a while that is very valuable for like analytics that are required from, like, if you want to monitor continuous usage, 100% availability and all of that, then some that sort of an architecture makes a lot of sense. But if you're doing something that's a hobby project or that's going to be used by maybe 100 to 150 people, then I think you can make do without most of them. What does the entire panel think of this?
And
Absolutely.
yes, and just something like about the email thing. So normally, you can it's, the best thing is to use a task queue. So it will take some time from your end, but eventually your mails will be sent. Or using a task queue, but using, for example, Mailgun, which is absolutely awesome, because Mailgun is email sending as a service, which has some, like, the first I don't know, it has a free limit per month or something like that. It's really affordable, very much affordable for sending mails. And I think that if ever you can also look into that, Mailgun. So, well, that was my 2 cents on the email issue.
Yeah, I actually use Mailgun. So
Oh,
the
great.
trouble I'm facing is, so in order to hit the Mailgun APIs, so I have to hit I so if I were to send 100 emails, I cannot just make 100 API calls at once. So I have to use an internal queuing system to basically schedule those API calls. So I guess
Yes.
as someone said, I can use Celery and RabbitMQ basically or to queue the API calls. So yeah, I'm working on that right now.
Okay. And Amazon also, I think, has some services for SMS and email sending, but I haven't explored that.
Yeah, I use a lot. Like if you're building a serverless application, AWS has, I think most of that. GCP also has uh, comparable services. Um, AWS has SQS, which I use a lot for everything queue, and they have the SNS part where you can set up the triggers, and then also send out SMSs and emails. For emails, I think there is. What's it called? I forgot the name. But it's all triggered via the SNS only.
Is it SES?
SES, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
And
use that.
for the yeah. And SMS. What's the SMS service name? Amazon's.
I forgot because normally, for example, in Mauritius, when you are considering sending SMS, it's quite expensive using the country's own emails, SMS services. But if you go to Amazon, so it's very cheap. But unfortunately, I forgot the name. Like, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. And
SNS,
and
right?
the
It's SNS.
yeah. SNS is the like via that you send, and then there is the other SMS part in which the pricing and all is actually defined. Uh,
Hmm.
think it has some other name. I forgot. Completely forgot right now.
And
I actually was curious, Anirudh, what's your choice or opinion on the serverless of GCP and AWS? So how fast is it to deploy? How cost effective is it? And how do you? What's your opinion on that?
So on server side, I have used Lambda on AWS side and Cloud Functions on GCP. So I found both are equally easy to set up and get started with. I have a little more experience with AWS, so I would say AWS is easier to me. But cloud functions are pretty easy. Like in the last place where I was working, they had the entire stack on GCP. I'm not very sure about the pricing part though, so maybe somebody else can comment on that. But that was also pretty easy to set up, and it was all done via this CI setup that we had. So we didn't really face much issues there.
Cool, very cool, very cool.
Yeah, yeah. I think we are on time right now. Abhira,
yes,
Gabriel.
yes, we are at the end of the session, and
Yeah.
thank you very much for like sharing your insights, Abhishek. It was really great. I mean, because you've successfully like shipped some side projects. One was the creator list. Another one is the ficate, I think, that XYZ, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah.
yes, so these are kind of side projects you ship, and it's another experience. So thank you very much for sharing those insights, and wish you good luck on your journey. And feel free to contribute to Flask on like in one way or the other. Thank you very much.